Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, 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 everyone, to the next segment, to the next part, the next recording that I'm making for the ReParenting course, Module 2, the attachment to the mother. We're actually today going to discuss, this is a video about attachment theory, okay? I'm going to share, as usually, my presentation, and let's get started. Let's get started discussing this very important component of the reparenting practice, okay? The attachment theory. Okay, the attachment theory is something we touch upon in Module 2. Okay, let's talk about it in details. I spoke about it briefly during the whole introduction to the course of reparenting. Let's talk about it in details, okay? What is attachment theory? The attachment theory discusses the importance of early emotional bonds between the baby and the parent. Specifically discusses the attachment between the baby and the mother, because in the beginning, that's a primary caretaker of the baby. When the attachment theory was formed in the 60s, in the previous century, in 1960s, that was the idea, right? Usually in most of the cases, I would say probably 95 or maybe even more %, it was the mother figure that was the primary caregiver during the first few months of the baby's birth, okay? And that's what the attachment theory focuses on: relationships and bonds, particularly long-term between people, including those between, of course, it's initiated. It's based upon the relationship between a parent and a child, but later on, we will deal with it in Module 4, okay? As we will discuss creating relationships with others, creating romantic relationships, as well as creating friendships, relationship between other people, okay? So the attachment theory describes and explains all about the emotional bonds and relationships that people tend to form, or the opposite, not form, okay? This theory actually suggests that people that are born with a need to forge bonds with caregivers, it actually talks about that. Infants are born with an innate, it's instinctual need to form bonds with their primary caregiver. First, it's a singular because it's a mother, then it turns into plural. Now, it's interesting to start understanding that nowadays, as we have discussed it earlier, the metaphor, the idea, the image, the way the associations we have with the word caregiver or primary caregiver may be changing, okay? Nowadays, a lot of dads are at home, stay-at-home dads, okay? Nowadays, we have nannies, right? Male nannies. Nowadays, we have a representation of the opposite sex being primary caregivers. Now, it's not just the mother. However, it's interesting to start noting. And this is what we will be exploring throughout the course. Does it have to be only the mother? Does it have to be, can it be just the father? Can it be that the primary caregiver, when the baby is born, the newborn, even let's go as early as the newborn, can it be just the father? Or does the mother have to be present? Is it an important component, a crucial component for the healthy development of the attachment, the ability to form healthy bonds and relationship with others? Or there is a possibility, if the mother is not available for whichever realistic reasons, right? If the father is the one substituting for the mother, is that okay? Would that be acceptable for this? That's something we will be exploring and discussing throughout the course, okay? Let's start with the history of the attachment theory, okay? The most significant figure when we talk about the attachment theory, if you ask any psychologist, if you look up on Google, if you write attachment theory, the name John Bowlby will come up, okay? John Bowlby, one second. John Bowlby, his full name is Edward John Mostyn Bowlby, okay? He was a British psychologist, psychiatrist, and psychoanalyst. Okay, it's interesting that he was born in 1907. He passed away in 1990. So he became its contemporary as it can be. 30 years ago, by the way, 30 years is not that much. I remember the 1990s. I am the 90s. You know, I was a teenager. I was in teenagers in the 80s. In the 90s is actually when I emigrated. I was still a teenager in the 90s. Yeah, the second part of my teenage years. I emigrated to the United States in 1992 at the age of 15 and a half. So the 90s is quite fresh, right? The 1990, it's interesting. Like, to me, it's very contemporary. That's something to keep in mind, that he was able to continue doing research for a long period of time, okay? He had 4 children, married Ursula Longstaff, right, in 1938. He coined the term attachment, and his key idea, he, by the way, had many other various, like I said, it's interesting to know that psychologists are not just coined with one main idea like it used to be, right? If you even take Martin Seligman or anybody else, right, any other significant contemporary psychologist, they come up with various theories throughout our life. Even taking Pavel Piskarov, the founder of NeuroGraphica, he's not just great with NeuroGraphica. NeuroGraphica is the one that's known now in the English-speaking world, right, outside of Russian-speaking world. But what's actually gaining also is metamodern quadrants, the pyramid, right? That's something I'm actually fostering, something I'm working on making a known, making known terms, okay? But that's the idea. It's interesting to know that nowadays contemporary psychologists are credited with number of various interesting contemporary, I want to say live theories, okay? I like to call them live theories because they're constantly changing, right? We see even the field of neurographic constantly changing. And that's what's happening with many contemporary psychological theories and ideas and thoughts, right? Taking Robert Dilts, right? He created the Dilts pyramid, but it's so contemporary. It's so people are adding to it. People adding more layers to it, right? The pyramid of development that Pavel created also was based on the Dilts pyramid, okay? It's so interesting to note. The one I use, the Dilts pyramid I actually use the one where somebody added something else, there are more layers, and it's so interesting to watch that happening. So it's important to know that John Bowlby, the father of the attachment theory, you know, it was a live theory. He constantly added to research more. There are more researches happening with the attachment theory, but of course he was the one that's kind of started the idea. And as usually, you know, it didn't just come out of the thin air, okay? It was based upon previous theories of how children, of how infants, babies, form, how humans, let's talk about adulthood, how do humans tend to form different types of relationship? Why are some humans more warm? Some humans are less, you know, more cold. How are some humans are easily forming, right? I can give you my personal example. My husband, we can walk into an auditorium full of people. My husband will be able to make friends. I'm not going to say it's going to be long-lasting friendship, but he's able to make acquaintances. He's able to meet people. 1, 2, 3. Within 10 minutes, he can get to know many people. Me, the opposite. It will take me at least an hour to just be quietly. I will be observing people, you know, not interacting, not direct interaction. It's so interesting to note, right? Where does that base on? So people started asking, specifically psychologists. We know psychologists is the study of why do people do things the way they do? Why? Why do they act a certain way? Why do they talk a certain way? Why do they behave a certain way? Okay. Why do people form relationships certain ways? Okay. And that's what John Bowlby started figuring out. Okay. He was specifically noticed. It started with him being interested in understanding the anxiety and distress that children experience when separated from primary caregivers, okay? He started figuring out what is going on there. Why can't, and we can see if you have children, if you ever had babysitters, right? I had a babysitter for my son. My son is my second child, okay? My daughter, my mother helped out, was raising my daughter. My mother-in-law helped out, 2 grandmothers, right? My son needed somebody, and I had a babysitter, beautiful, wonderful. God answered my prayers, a very warm person, somebody who I personally would love, you know, somebody I prayed for to be a caregiver. My younger children, I have 3 younger children, never had babysitters. I actually was a stay-at-home mom for many, many years. I homeschooled my kids, my older kids, for many years. But that was the idea. I studied so much about the attachment theory. It actually brought me to the realization that I do want to be the one taking care of my children. And for a long time, I wouldn't even leave my children. If the mother-in-law would be able to babysit, she would. But other than that, I wouldn't leave my children with a stranger. Like, people would be like, oh, why don't you like come to this event or some kind of outing? And I'll be like, I have young children. They're like, oh, just hire a babysitter, somebody can take them. I'm like, no, I wouldn't want to leave them with a stranger, right? Because I understood the importance, me being an early childhood educator, I have an extensive experience, at least 20 years working with early childhood. I'm an early childhood educator, bilingual educator, special educator, right? I have a lot of background. And that's why when I look at this, it totally makes sense. And I actually internalized and understood that I wouldn't want to, because it does bring anxiety. So John Bowlby started looking into that. He started thinking, why? Why do children get nervous? Why do children show distress when they're left, right? My friend had a baby recently. The baby just turned 3 months. I walked in, the baby saw me and started crying, right? And it's understood. My kids were like, oh, it's so cute. Why is she crying? And to me, it just made sense that she was crying because she was distressed. She's so unfamiliar. 3 months is, by the way, when they start recognizing, that's like a borderline a bit. Usually they do it a bit longer later. I mean, 4, 5, 6 months, right? Stranger anxiety. But this child depends on various children, right? There are no clear cuts, you know, there's just generalization. And she saw unfamiliar face and she became distressed and she started crying. Even though mother was holding her, she didn't see her mother's face. And that's the idea. John Bowlby started asking questions, and that's how research starts nowadays, right? That's how we all come to where we are. Excuse me, where we are in life, right? We start asking questions. We start figuring out, why does this work this way and not the other way around, okay? Bowlby was, of course, like every other psychologist, even nowadays, when we start studying psychology, we inevitably will always come to Sigmund Freud. Freud suggested that infants become attached to the source of pleasure, right? We're actually I'm going to make a separate video on, that's going to be next, by the way, where I'm going to discuss Freud's stages of social development, of the way he viewed people develop, okay? And one of the main ideas, one of the main source of information for him was that he would talk about babies, infants, getting attached to whatever was the source of pleasure, okay? Freud focused a lot on the way people experience bodily connections, right? In this case, it's about pleasure, right? So he would talk about the fact that infants are in the oral stage of development. So of course they become attached to their mothers because their mothers fulfill their oral needs. In our specific case, that means feeding. Okay, mothers feed their baby, breastfeeding specifically. Remember, Freud lived in the time when there was no bottle feeding. Breastfeeding was, Freud lived in the 30s of last century, okay? He actually died in 37, I think. So his theories were even earlier, 2030s, okay? And that's the idea that Freud actually focused more on conventional type of parenting, which is mothers birthing, mothers feeding, mothers being the primary caregivers, right? And everything like that, okay? Bowlby decided to go further, right? Bowlby started studying other behaviorist theories. Now, behavioral theory was the prevailing type of psychological theories in the it started with Freud. Like I said, he was very much focused, even though we talk with Freud being the father of the conscientious, right? The consciousness, how he discovered there are three types of consciousness. id, ego, and superego. We discussed it yesterday when I posted the transactional analysis theory, right? The truth is he focused a lot on the needs of the body, okay? And that's what the behavioral psychology deals with, the needs of the body, how the body reacts, how the person behaves. That's about actions. That's about what does the body do, okay? It's not just about the mind or the emotions. I'm angry or I think this way. It's about what do you do about it, okay? And of course, behavior, as people started studying why people do things the way they do, which is the field of psychology, the behavioral psychology field has been developing rapidly because people started understanding why is there a certain way people behave. They coined it a learned behavior, right? They started talking about the fact that attachment was simply a learned behavior, okay? They were talking about the fact that attachment came, babies attached to mothers because she feeds them. She basically, it's the idea, it's very simplified idea that babies are dependent upon the mother. That's why they're attached to them, you know. If that's the case, would be, let's say in the 60s or the 70s or the 80s, when the hippie revolution started and gender roles, the beginning of the gender roles changes, right? Now we're in the, I'm not even going to say the peak. I think we didn't get to the peak of the gender roles changing, you know, the change, the total change. But in the 60s, 70s, 80s, when it just started, wouldn't the idea then be proved that the babies would get as attached to the fathers if the father would be the primary caregiver? The mother, let's say, when goes back to work as soon as she gives birth, and the father is the one bottle feeding the baby, right? So the question comes, and there were a lot of research done on that. And it's interesting to note, right? But the behavior theories basically are saying that it doesn't matter who it is, whoever takes care of the baby will be the person the baby gets the most attached to, okay? Because the caregiver feeds the child and provides nourishment, and that's what the child needs. Again, purely behavior, purely bodily needs basis, okay? What Bowlby did, he started observing. Of course, he didn't just observe. He decided that it cannot be just the fact that the babies are dependent upon the feeding. That's why they create this whole attachment behavior, right? So he started observing a total behavior of babies, of infants, of newborns, right? He found that attachment was characterized by clear behavior and motivational patterns, okay? We're going to now discuss this in detail, what that means, but basic idea, basic inference, this is what it means to us as now, is that when children are frightened, okay? And by the way, what we discussed in the transactional analysis is what Dr. Eric Byrne proposed that even adults do, okay? They seek proximity, they seek care, love, nurturing from their primary caregivers in order to receive both comfort and care, okay? This is the reason why Eric Byrne said that adults would kind of regress to their child state, feeling like a child, or their parent state, feeling the need to connect to the parent, okay? And if the parent is not available physically, then they will actually act out as if they're parents, okay? It's interesting to note all of these theories are completely, of course, connected to each other. And in the reparenting courses, what we do, we actually connect them together on the realistic level. Let's go further, okay? Let's start understanding what attachment is, okay? Like I mentioned before, attachment means an emotional bond, a way to form relationships with another person, okay? So John Bowlby believed that the earliest bonds were formed by children with their caregivers, right? He suggested that attachment serves to keep the infants close to the mother, okay? John Bowlby, again, this was in the 60s, and he was big on the idea that the primary caregiver at that moment, that's what it was, the typical, of course, figure was the mother. So he talked a lot about the importance of the relationship of the mother being next to the child physically, emotionally available, of course, you know, mentally discussing and talking to the child, okay? Bowlby actually viewed attachment as a product of evolutionary process, which is what I said. It's a live theory. Later on, of course, people added to the attachment theory to categorize it more, to explain how it acts more, okay? While the behavior theories of attachment, like we mentioned, suggest that attachment was just a learned process. The child gets attached because he needs to be fed, right? A purely biological function. Bowlby started talking about that children are born, and this is an important idea to take away from this theory. Children are born with an innate drive to form attachments, okay? Basically, it's instinctual, okay? Forming attachment is instinctual. And later on, psychologists, social psychologists, personal psychologists, all types of psychologists have agreed with that idea that it's true. We humans are born with an innate need, an innate drive, an instinct to form attachments, okay? And of course, further social psychological theories came where we discussed the introverts and extroverts and people in between on different spectrums of introversy and extroversy. That's the idea that people all are born with the need to socialize, to form attachments, bonds with others. Some people have more need for it. Some people have less. Some people can create social bonds with many people, like extroverts, and some people are more introverts and they would prefer like few people that they know for sure. Otherwise, they tend to keep them themselves. But again, we are talking where there is a whole spectrum. So we can't just generalize as just calling somebody extrovert or introvert. There's really lots of different stages in between. Okay. Let's go further. Again, going back to the infant state, okay? The infant attachment cycle goes like this, okay? Baby has a need. Baby starts crying, okay? The caregiver meets the need and trust starts developing, okay? The more the behavior gets fulfilled, the more the needs become met by the caregiver, the more the child develops this belief that it's okay to trust the world, okay? The anthropologicals, the historians, you know, the psychologists who study the history of the way people behave, they have discussed the idea that throughout the history, children who do maintain proximity to the attachment figure, children who stay closer to their mother, closer to their caregivers, right, are more likely to receive comfort. They, first of all, have more of a trust into the world, okay? They're more likely to receive comfort and protection, and they're more likely to survive the adulthood, okay? During the crisis, during the trauma, during the stress situation, they're more likely to find what we like to call resources to deal with the situation, to deal with the challenge, to find the necessary components within the challenge to help them grow. We all know the challenges are there for us to help us grow, okay? Overcoming challenges brings us to growth. And that's the idea that when people believe they have we're going to talk about it in about 2 more videos, the idea of the basic trust with Erik Erikson, he based on this idea of the attachment theory, right? The idea that children, infants develop the trust in the world, okay? So the central theme of the attachment theory is that primary caregivers who are available, who are responsive to infants' needs, allow the children to develop a sense of security, okay? Infants kind of learn that caregivers are dependable beings, you know, in their surrounding,